prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, safely in her arms. She found a bassinet and laid him down in it. He gurgled. She gave him a tickle. A matronly head appeared around a door. It said, "Sister Mary, what are you doing here? Shouldn't we be on duty in room 4? Master Crowley said, "Just glide along, there's a good nun." "Have you seen the husband anywhere? He's not in the waiting room." "I've only seen Master Crowley, and he told me—" "I'm sure he did," said Sister Grace Voluble firmly. "I suppose I'd better go and look for the wretched man." "Come in and keep an eye on her, will you? She's a bit woozy, but the baby's fine." Sister Grace paused. "Why are you winking? Is there something wrong with your eye?" "You know," Sister Mary hissed archly. "The babies. The exchange." Of course, in good time. But we can't have the father wandering around, can we?" said Sister Grace. No telling what he might see. So just wait here and mind the baby, there's a dear." She sailed off down the polished corridor. Sister Mary, wheeling her bassinet, entered the delivery room. Mr. Young was more than woozy. Mrs. Young was more than woozy. She was fast asleep, with the look of determined self-satisfaction of someone who knows that other people are going to have to do all the running around for once. Baby A was sleeping beside her, weighed and name-tagged. Sister Mary, who had been brought up to be helpful, removed the name tag, copied it out, and attached the duplicate to the baby in her care. The babies looked similar, both being small, blotchy, and looking sort of, though not really, like Winston Churchill. Now, thought Sister Mary, I could do with a nice cup of tea. Most of the members of the convent were old-fashioned Satanists, like their parents and grandparents before them. They'd been brought up to it and weren't, when you got around to it, particularly evil. Human beings mostly aren't. They just get carried away by new ideas, like dressing up in jackboots and shouting at people, or dressing up in white sheets and lynching people, or dressing up in tie-dye jeans and playing guitars at people. Offer people a new creed with a costume and their hearts and minds will follow. Anyway, being brought up as a Satanist tended to take the edge off it. It was something you did on Saturday nights, and the rest of the time you simply got on with life as best you could, just like everyone else. Besides, Sister Mary was a nurse, and nurses, whatever their creed, are primarily nurses, which had a lot to do with wearing your watch upside down, keeping calm in emergencies, and dying for a cup of tea. She hoped someone would come soon. She'd done the important bit. Now she wanted her tea. It may help to understand human affairs to be clear that most of the great triumphs and tragedies of history are caused not by people being fundamentally good or fundamentally bad, but by people being fundamentally people. There was a knock on the door. She opened it. "Has it happened yet?" asked Mr. Young. "I'm the father, the husband, whatever, both." Sister Mary had expected the American cultural attaché to look like Blake Carrington or J.R. Ewing. Mr. Young didn't look like any Americans she'd ever seen on television, except possibly for the avuncular sheriff in the better class of murder mystery, with a little old lady as a sleuth, and no car chases unless they're done very slowly. He was something of a disappointment. She didn't think much of his cardigan either. She swallowed her disappointment. "Oh, yes," she said. "Congratulations. Your lady wife's asleep, poor pet." Mr. Young looked over his shoulder. "Twins," he said. He reached for his pipe. He stopped reaching for his pipe. He reached for it again. "Twins? No one said anything about twins." "Oh, no," said Sister Mary hurriedly. "This one's yours. The other ones are someone else's. Just looking after him till Sister Grace gets back." "No," she reiterated, pointing at the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. "This one's definitely yours, from the top of his head to the tips of his hoofy-woofies. Which he hasn't got," she added hastily. Mr. Young peered down. "Ah, yes," he said doubtfully. "He looks like my side of the family. All present and correct, is he?" "Oh, yes," said Sister Mary. He's a very normal child, she added. Very, very normal. There was a pause. They stared at the sleeping baby. You don't have much of an accent, said Sister Mary. Have you been here long? About 10 years, said Mr. Young, mildly puzzled. The job moved, you see, and I had to move with it. It must be a very exciting job, I've always thought, said Sister Mary. Mr. Young looked gratified. Not everyone appreciated the more stimulating aspects of cost accountancy. I expect it is very different from where you were before, Sister Mary went on. I suppose so, said Mr. Young, who'd never really thought about it. Luton, as far as he could remember, was pretty much like Tadfield. The same sort of hedges between your house and the railway station, the same sort of people. Taller buildings, for one thing, said Sister Mary desperately. Mr. Young stared at her. The only one he could think of was the Alliance and Leicester offices. And I expect you go to a lot of garden parties, said the nun. Ah, he was on firmer ground here. Deirdre was very keen on that sort of thing. Lots, he said with feeling. Deirdre makes jam for them, you know, and I normally help with the White Elephant. This was an aspect of Buckingham Palace society that had never occurred to Sister Mary, although the pachyderm fitted right in. I expected the tribute. I read where these foreign potentates give her all sorts of things. I'm sorry? I'm a big fan of the royal family, you know. Oh, so am I, said Mr. Young, leaping gratefully onto this new ice floe in the bewildering stream of consciousness. Yes, you knew where you were with the royals, the proper ones, of course, who pearled their weight in the hand-waving and bridge-opening department, not the ones who went to discos all night long and were sick all over the paparazzi. It is possibly worth mentioning at this point that Mr. Young thought that paparazzi was a kind of Italian linoleum. That's nice, said Sister Mary. I thought you people weren't too keen on them, what with revoluting and throwing all those tea sets into the river. She chattered on, encouraged by the order's instructions that members should always say what was on their minds. Mr. Young was out of his depth and too tired to worry about it very much. The religious life probably made people a little odd. He wished Mrs. Young would wake up. Then one of the words in Sister Mary's wittering struck a hopeful chord in his mind. Would there be any possibility of me possibly being able to have a cup of tea, perhaps? He ventured. Oh my, said Sister Mary, her hands flying to her mouth. Whatever am I thinking of? Mr. Young made no comment. I'll see to it right away. Are you sure you don't want coffee, though? There's one of those vendable machines on the next floor. Tea, please, said Mr. Young. My word, you really have gone native, haven't you? Said Sister Mary gaily as she bustled out. Mr. Young, left alone, one sleeping wife and two sleeping babies, sagged onto a chair. Yes, it must be all that getting up early and kneeling and so on. Good people, of course, but not entirely compos mentis. He'd seen a Ken Russell film once. There had been nuns in it. There didn't seem to be any of that sort of thing going on, but no smoke without fire and so on. He sighed. It was then that baby A awoke and settled down to a really good wail. Mr. Young hadn't had to quiet a screaming baby for years. He'd never been much good at it to start with. He'd always respected Sir Winston Churchill, and patting small versions of him on the bottom always seemed ungracious. Welcome to the world, he said wearily. You'll get used to it after a while. The baby shut its mouth and glared at him as if he was a recalcitrant general. Sister Mary chose that moment to come in with the cup of tea. Satanist or not, she'd also found a plate and arranged some iced biscuits on it. They were the sort you only ever get at the bottom of certain tea time assortments. Mr. Young's was the same pink as a surgical appliance, and had a snowman picked out on it in white icing. I don't expect you normally have these, she said. They're what you call cookies. We call them biscuits. Mr. Young had just opened his mouth to explain that, yes, so did he, and so did people even in Luton, when another nun rushed in, breathless. She looked at Sister Mary, realized that Mr. Young had never seen the inside of a pentagram, and confined herself to pointing at baby A and winking. Sister Mary nodded and winked back. The nun wheeled the baby out. As methods of human communication go, a wink is quite versatile. You can say a lot with a wink. For example, the new nun's wink said, "Where the hell have you been? Baby B has been born. We're ready to make the switch, and here's the wrong room. And here you're in the wrong room with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, lord of darkness, drinking tea. Do you realize I've nearly been shot?" And as far as she was concerned, Sister Mary's answering wink meant, "Here's the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. You can't talk now because there's this outsider here." Whereas Sister Mary, on the other hand, had thought that the orderly's wink had been more along the lines of, "Well done, Sister Mary. Switched over the babies all by yourself. Now indicate to me the superfluous child, and I shall remove it and let you get on with your tea with His Royal Excellency, the American culture." And therefore, her own wink had meant, "There you go, dearie, that's baby B. Now take him away and leave me to chat with His Excellency. I've always wanted to ask him why they have those tall buildings with all those mirrors on them." The subtleties of this were all quite lost on Mr. Young, who was extremely embarrassed at all this clandestine affection and was thinking, that Mr. Russell, he knew what he was talking about and no mistake. Sister Mary's error might have been noticed by the other nun had she herself not been severely rattled by the Secret Servicemen in Mr. Dowling's room, who kept looking at her with growing unease. This was because they had been trained to react in a certain way to people in long flowing robes and long flowing headdresses, and were currently suffering from a conflict of signals. Humans suffering from a conflict of signals aren't the best people to be holding guns, especially when they've just witnessed a natural childbirth, which definitely looked an un-American way of bringing new citizens into the world. Also, they'd heard that there were missiles in the building. Mrs. Young stirred. "Have you picked a name for him yet?" said Sister Mary archly. Said Mr. Young. "Oh, no, not really. If it was a girl, it would have been Lucinda, after my mother, or Germaine, that was Deidre's choice." "Wormwood's a nice name," said the nun, remembering her classics. "Or Damien. Damien's very popular."